Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Veramed Stories podcast. I'm your host Himesh Chauhan. In this week's episode, we'll be talking about the ISPOR conference. So joining me, I have Louise and Rhys. Louise, welcome to the podcast.
Hi Himesh, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. And Rhys, welcome to the podcast as well.
Hi.
Right, let's start off with you, Louise. If you don't mind, why don't you explain what your sort of job role here is at Veramed?
Sure, yeah. So my name's Louise Chapman. I'm Director of Business Development and Marketing at Veramed. I am now heading up the commercial division under Stuart Maguire, our Chief Business Officer. So I am involved in all things marketing, sales and contracts and proposals. So essentially winning more work for our wonderful programmers and statisticians.
Excellent. And how about you, Rhys? Why don't you give us a quick little introduction on yourself?
Hi, I'm Rhys Warham. I am a Statistician II here at Veramed. I've been with the company since September 2020, so around 2.5 years, just over now, since I joined as a graduate straight out of university. So I came in on the graduate training program. Day to day, I'm working as a statistician as part of the branch of statisticians within Veramed who fall under the bracket or the title of the Evidence and Value Generation Group.
Excellent. Right, Louise, back to you then. So can you explain to our audience what the ISPOR conference is and what it stands for?
Yes, so it's quite a mouthful. The ISPOR stands for the International Society for Pharmacoeconomics and Outcomes Research. And essentially the ISPOR conference, there's 2 of them per year alongside some other kind of shorter events. And they're 2 big conferences, one in the EU, one in the US, and they are broadly focused on HEOR topics. So real world evidence, health policy, outcomes, economic evaluation. So I've been going to ISPOR conferences since I worked for a full-scale CRO back in 2007, and the event has grown significantly since then. I was told last year when I was in Vienna for the ISPOR EU conference that there was about 7,000 people in attendance, and some of the big plenary sessions attract some, really big names in HEOR, and they also have kind of speakers from the FDA and NICE and, some of the payers as well. So it's a really high profile conference these days.
Okay, and the one that you're attending this time round, is this the one in the US or in the EU?
So the one that we are attending in a couple of weeks is in Boston. So it's the US event. So it's a great place to go. Boston is a complete mecca for pharma and biotech companies. So, we're going to be able to get Veramed in front of some really interesting and kind of big names in the US.
And how many days does this conference typically go on for?
So the conference usually runs for about 3 days. There's usually some short courses at the beginning. So on the Saturday, set up for the exhibits on the Sunday. I think this year there's 12 categories of content with loads of different learning formats. So there'll be the big plenary sessions, and then there's the agenda is chock-a-block with posters and issues, panels, workshops, breakout sessions. ISPOR is really good for some different kind of educational formats. And, when you're walking around the exhibit hall, you'll see kind of breakout groups of people with headphones on, and they'll be, listening to somebody presenting, through a mic, and they'll be answering questions. So it's an interesting kind of mix of online and in person too, because they stream a lot of the sessions, so you can kind of attend it even if you're not in Boston. So yeah, interesting packed agenda over 3 days.
Excellent. You mentioned that you've been going since 2007. So how much has it changed? You've obviously mentioned it's grown quite significantly, and obviously with the technology nowadays where you can stream, what sort of your personal experiences of it changing?
So it used to be quite an intimate conference, more akin to kind of Fuse, I'd say, in terms of kind of, there being a small handful of exhibitors and some interesting kind of workshops and presentations. Now, I mean, it's difficult to say how many posters are presented, but they have 3 days of posters and a number of different poster presentations on each day. The plenary sessions are huge. The one in Vienna I went to, I think there was 3 or 4 people sitting on the stage with mics, but they were tiny little dots on this huge stage with massive kind of screens and, the full setup. So it's come a long way. I was, the first one I went to was in Paris, and it was in a small kind of Hilton. The one I went to in Vienna last year was in the Vienna Conference Centre, and I think the Boston one is in the Boston Convention Centre. So the large scale events for the HEOR industry, for sure. ISPOR's the kind of main society, I guess you'd say, for this kind of industry.
Right, I see. That takes us on very nicely to you, Rhys. So Louise mentioned people present a lot of posters and things like that. So were you able to give us a bit of an insight of what you are presenting?
Yeah, sure. So I myself am presenting a poster. So Veramed are going to be well represented in general anyway. We had 5 abstracts submitted. So I'm presenting one of 4 posters that we've got going to the conference, and there's also one oral presentation that we had accepted as well. So myself, as I say, I'm presenting my own poster. So it's largely focused on data visualization. Now, I think I actually spoke with Louise on this a little while back, and it's a topic that there's a real interest in and a big appeal for at these conferences lately. Specifically, it's going to look at data visualization as a tool to quickly understand diary data. So what I'm meaning by that is where patients are completing, something like a questionnaire each day, or maybe they have a set of symptoms they grade each day over a period of time. So this is an example of we've got all these different, they refer to them as mHealth data or mHealth devices, so we've got all these new medical technologies, so things like wearable devices, and we have the capacity to collect unprecedented amounts of data because we're doing it so frequently. I mean, some of these wearable devices are taking measurements at regular intervals every day. So my poster is really looking at data visualization as a tool to quickly understand that, such sheer quantities of data, we can't gain the insights we need to gain from tables alone. So it's really highlighting visualization as a mechanism to understand that. As I say, there's then 3 further posters, so I'll fly through them quickly, what they're looking at. So first of those 3, we actually have another visualization poster going. So this is looking at a novel way to visualize the results of network meta-analyses whilst simultaneously assessing the consistency assumption. So that's one of the key assumptions that underpins network meta-analyses. So it allows you to these visualizations will simultaneously allow investigation of the results, but also to assess, the assumptions that are underpinning those analyses. The second of those 3 other posters we have is looking at survival analyses when we don't have individual patient level data. So in the case of survival analyses, we often need data from individual patients if we're doing something like Cox regression or we want Kaplan-Meier estimates. So this second poster is going to look at using pseudo data to replace individual patient data by using sort of aggregates when we don't have individual patient data because it's, for example, owned by a competitor and can't be shared due to some privacy or proprietary restrictions. The final poster, so this is one that's looking at cluster analyses on real-world data to find patterns of multi-morbidity. So when it comes to these analyses, there's kind of, 2 ways you can do it. Now, the clustering that is, and this poster is looking to outline a simple framework to make the choice between these 2 options clear. Those 2 options being whether you work with individual patient data, cluster the individuals, and then retrospectively assess the disease characteristics, or whether you're working with data that's first being summarized across individuals into the disease characteristics. So that's the posters. Final thing we've got, as I said, we've also had one oral presentation that's been accepted. So it's great that we'll be represented through an oral presentation as well. And that's going to look at some of the new EU HTA legislation that's coming into effect in 2025. So the talk will cover a few things, being an oral presentation, but among others, it's going to look at how this new legislation, it defines the HTA requirements within a PICO framework. However, the clinical data that forms the basis of the value dossier for HTA work is, of course, coming from clinical trials, which are typically conducted under the framework of an estimand. So it's going to highlight how we need to be thinking earlier on about mapping that estimand into a PICO framework. And it's got some nice case studies and practical examples in that presentation as well. And yeah,
sounds like you've got quite a lot coming up this conference. Is this your first conference you've gone to, or have you been to others in the past?
It's the second conference I've been to. It's the first of this nature. Last year I went to Gothenburg. I presented a poster at the PSI conference. Obviously the conferences are different in nature, as I said. As Louise spoke to, I guess this one is, well, as compared with PSI, where I guess it's targeted to statisticians, but the content might be quite broad. It could cover different areas within companies that statisticians will be working on. I guess this one's more targeted to an area of research, but might be more broad in terms of the different stakeholders that touches. So yeah, second conference, but I guess the first of this nature.
Right, I see. So it's good they've got some experience already presenting posters, and by the end of it, you'll be an absolute expert from what it sounds like. Excellent. So how was the sort of selection process within Veramed for you particularly? Like, how did you go about like coming up with the idea of the poster and sort of submitting it and getting selected?
So I think part of the idea to maybe target ISPOR came naturally from, the type of work I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. I touched on it at the top when I introduced myself that I'm part of this EVG group within Veramed, and I think a lot of the statisticians who are working within that group are either working on projects that closely align with some of the topics of interest for ISPOR, or they're working with stakeholders and the type of people who ISPOR is really targeted at. So, I mean, across Veramed, those abstracts that I've mentioned just have been accepted. They're largely coming from that group. I think it's quite natural that those within group have ideas that are well suited to this conference. Myself, the inspiration came out a little bit. I did a webinar for Veramed on data visualization back in January, and we touched upon a lot more than this poster, but the idea came from a case study that I presented within that webinar. That webinar we did in January was kind of assessing the current state of affairs when it comes to data visualization in the industry, where it's going next, how the way things are done in the industry will change in the future. And as part of that, we touched on a lot of the challenges people were having, one of which being, we have this capacity to collect more data now than we ever have in the past. How do we keep up with that data collection when it comes to understanding it and analysing it? So that motivated that case study for the webinar, and I think then it kind of clicked that maybe I could take this a little further, and that there was an abstract to be submitted in there somewhere as well.
Yeah, excellent. It sounds like Veramed are very well represented there with the number of posters and the audio talk we have. Louise, will you be able to sort of expand a bit more on Veramed's involvement within the conference itself?
Yeah, so traditionally you tend to see full service CROs and HEOR providers with stats offerings exhibiting at ISPOR. But with the rise of real-world data, real-world evidence and data visualization, we are seeing more biometrics and biostatistics CROs and consultancies exhibiting. I actually just attended Vienna in November, and when we identified there being a real need to have some kind of stand and presence in the exhibit hall as well. So in Boston, we are going to have a Veramed exhibit stand that I will be at with our head of evidence and value generation, and we'll have a demo on there. So we'll be kind of showing, some of the things that the EVG group are doing, obviously all blinded, and, giving some people an understanding of our capabilities and how we can kind of complement some of the HEOR companies, but also, obviously working with pharma and biotech people who will be hopefully kind of networking in that area too. So we've got the exhibit stand, and obviously we've got our kind of capabilities on show through the posters and the oral presentation as well.
Excellent. So yeah, anyone attending, please head over to our stand. You'll be able to see a working demo of what we can offer. And Rhys, are there any sort of particular talks or topics that you're interested to attend when you're not presenting?
Yeah, a few things have jumped out from the agenda already. I mean, of course, the obvious answers to going to be the Veramed ones that I've already touched on. We've got some really exciting material going to the conference. But I think outside of that, a couple of topics that are nicely covered at the conference that kind of overlap with what I'm doing day to day. So, I see there's a lot of content there on patient-centered research. So that's pretty exciting because, day to day I'm working with teams who are working in that space. Another one I've seen on the agenda that's quite strongly covered, as you would expect, is pricing and reimbursement. So that's a topic which is, closely aligned with what I'm doing in my project work day to day. So I think, that's what's exciting about this conference in general, kind of working in a team that's in this space or works with a lot of other teams in this space. Just, the sheer volume of content that's going to be there that's so closely related to what I'm doing and what I'm interested in doing during my project work is really nice. Yeah.
Excellent. I just realized, Louise, I haven't actually asked you when this conference is taking place. So would you be able to tell the audience when the conference is and when our stand and exhibition, everything will be up and running?
Yeah, so it runs from May the 6th to the 10th in Boston. And our stand will be up and ready to rock and roll from the 7th till the 10th. So yeah, come and have a chat to us about all things evidence and value generation, and go and watch Rhys's presentations and posters too.
Definitely, I echo those sentiments as well. Well, thank you both very much for joining me on this podcast and explaining what the conference is and what our involvement is there. I feel like I've learned a lot, and hopefully the people listening have as well. Thank you both for joining me, and thank you all very much for listening. If you'd like to be notified for any future episodes, please subscribe to us on Spotify, iTunes, or whichever podcast platform you're using. If you'd like to know more about Veramed, please visit our website at veramed.co.uk, or you can find us on LinkedIn. If you have any questions about Veramed, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to help. You can also find us on YouTube and Instagram at We Are Veramed. Thank you all very much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.